Most people who are trying to lose belly fat believe they are losing the battle during the day. They think the real fight happens in the gym, on the walking track, or at the dinner table where calories are counted and portions are restricted. What almost no one is told is that the most important hours for burning visceral fat happen when the lights are off, the body is horizontal, and the mind is finally quiet. And the uncomfortable truth is that many people are unknowingly sabotaging those hours every single night, even while doing everything right during the day. Visceral fat is not like the fat you can pinch under your skin. It is metabolically active, hormonally sensitive, and deeply connected to survival signals in the body. It does not respond well to force. It does not melt away simply because you exercised harder or ate less. In fact, when the body senses stress, hunger, or hormonal chaos, visceral fat becomes more stubborn, not less. From a biological perspective, that fat is not stored out of laziness or weakness, but out of protection. The body holds onto it when it believes danger is present. Nighttime is when the body decides whether it is safe enough to let that fat go. While you sleep, hormones quietly take over. Insulin should fall. Cortisol should soften. Growth hormone should rise. Fat-burning pathways should activate. Repair should begin. But for millions of people, this sequence never fully happens, not because they are broken, but because their biology is being signaled in the wrong direction without them realizing it. Many people go to bed in a state of quiet metabolic stress. Blood sugar is unstable. Insulin is still elevated from late meals or sugary snacks. Cortisol remains high from long days, emotional strain, and constant stimulation. The nervous system never truly shifts into repair mode. When this happens, the body interprets the night not as a time to burn fat, but as a time to conserve energy and protect vital organs. Visceral fat, sitting deep around the liver and intestines, becomes a shield rather than a fuel source. This is why extreme dieting often backfires. Calorie restriction without hormonal alignment tells the body that food is scarce. Overtraining tells the body that danger is present. Poor sleep tells the body that the environment is unsafe. And when those signals combine, visceral fat becomes even more guarded. The scale may move, but the belly remains. Frustration builds, and people blame themselves, unaware that their biology is simply responding as it was designed to. The overlooked truth is that fat loss is not a punishment the body endures. It is a permission the body grants. That permission is controlled by hormones, not willpower. And the most powerful hormonal window occurs at night, when the body is no longer distracted by movement, digestion, or external stresses. During sleep, the body asks one simple question: are we safe enough to burn stored energy, or do we need to hold on? This is where the idea of a simple nighttime drink becomes interesting, not as a magic trick, but as a biological signal. Certain nutrients and compounds have the ability to gently lower insulin, calm the stress response, and support the natural fat-burning rhythm that should occur during sleep. Not by stimulating the body, but by reassuring it. Not by forcing fat loss, but by removing the signals that block it. When insulin remains elevated at night, fat burning is essentially locked. Insulin is a storage hormone. Its job is to move energy into cells and keep it there. Even small spikes late in the evening can suppress fat oxidation for hours. At the same time, cortisol, the stress hormone, often rises at night in people who are overtired, underfed, or overstimulated. Cortisol tells the body to stay alert, to conserve fuel, and to protect vital organs. Visceral fat responds directly to cortisol, becoming more resistant to breakdown under its influence. The goal then is not to stimulate fat burning aggressively before bed, but to quiet the signals that prevent it. A properly chosen nighttime drink can support this shift by stabilizing blood sugar, reducing cortisol output, and encouraging parasympathetic nervous system activity. This is the state in which growth hormone is released, cellular repair is activated, and stored fat becomes accessible. This approach feels counterintuitive to many people because it does not involve struggle. There is no intense workout. There is no starvation. There is no punishment. Instead, it is about alignment. When the body senses consistency, nourishment, and safety, it stops clinging to visceral fat. It no longer needs to protect itself in the same way. Fat loss becomes a side effect of balance rather than a battle. What makes this especially powerful is that nighttime habits compound quietly. You do not feel them working in the moment. There is no rush, no adrenaline, no dramatic sensation. But over days and weeks, the hormonal environment begins to change. Sleep deepens, morning blood sugar stabilizes, inflammation softens, the belly slowly responds, not because it was attacked, but because it was finally allowed to release what it had been holding on to. This is not about chasing trends or believing in overnight miracles. Biology does not work that way, but it does respond predictably to the right signals, given consistently. When you understand that visceral fat is listening more closely to hormones than to calories, your entire approach changes. You stop asking how hard you can push and start asking how well you can support. The idea that one simple nighttime drink could influence this process is not hype. When viewed through this lens, it is simply a tool, a gentle nudge in the right direction, a way of telling the body that the day is over. Stress can come down and repair can begin. And when the body believes that message, it does what it has always known how to do. Visceral fat is not just stored energy sitting quietly under the skin. It is active tissue that lives deep inside the abdomen, wrapping itself around vital organs like the liver, pancreas, and intestines. Unlike subcutaneous fat, which mainly affects appearance, visceral fat behaves more like an endocrine organ. It releases inflammatory chemicals, disrupts normal hormone signaling, and interferes with how the body manages blood sugar, cholesterol, and stress. This is why someone can look only moderately overweight on the outside, yet carry a much higher risk of diabetes, heart disease, and fatty liver on the inside. What makes visceral fat especially dangerous is how closely it responds to insulin and cortisol. Insulin resistance is one of its primary drivers. When cells stop responding efficiently to insulin, the body compensates by producing more of it. Elevated insulin signals storage, not release. Visceral fat is particularly sensitive to this signal and will expand rapidly in response, even when overall calorie intake does not seem excessive. This is why many people gain belly fat without feeling like they are overeating, and why traditional calorie counting often fails to address the root cause. Chronic inflammation adds another layer to this problem. Visceral fat produces inflammatory cytokines that worsen insulin resistance, creating a vicious cycle. Inflammation tells the body that something is wrong, that the environment may be unsafe, and that energy should be conserved. The body responds by storing fat in places where it can be quickly accessed in an emergency, and the abdomen becomes the preferred location. This is not a flaw in the system, but an ancient survival response that no longer matches modern lifestyles. Nighttime cortisol plays a crucial role in this process. Cortisol is meant to be high in the morning to help you wake up and gradually fall as the day ends. In many people, this rhythm is reversed. Stress, undersleeping, emotional strain, and unstable blood sugar cause cortisol to remain elevated at night. Elevated nighttime cortisol directly promotes visceral fat storage while simultaneously blocking fat breakdown. It also raises blood sugar, which then raises insulin, further reinforcing the storage signal during hours when the body should be repairing and resting. Modern eating patterns quietly push this system in the wrong direction. Late dinners, evening desserts, sweetened drinks, and constant snacking keep insulin elevated well into the night. Each spike in blood sugar is interpreted by the body as a reason to store energy. When this happens repeatedly in the evening, the body never enters a true fat-burning state during sleep. Instead of shifting into repair mode, it stays in a semi-alert, storage-focused state until morning. This is not a failure of willpower, it is a mismatch between biology and behavior. The body is responding exactly as it was designed to, based on the signals it receives. When food arrives late and often, when stress never fully resolves, and when sleep is shallow or fragmented, visceral fat becomes a predictable outcome. Understanding this shifts the conversation away from blame and toward clarity. The issue is not discipline, but confused metabolic signaling, especially during the evening hours when the body is most sensitive to hormonal cues. After the sun goes down, the body begins a quiet shift in priorities. Muscles no longer need rapid energy, digestion is meant to slow, and the brain prepares for repair and memory consolidation. Insulin sensitivity naturally drops in the evening as part of this rhythm. This means the same food that may be handled easily in the morning requires more insulin at night. At the same time, growth hormone begins to rise as sleep approaches, signaling the body to repair tissues, mobilize fat, and preserve lean muscle. These opposing forces create a narrow window where the body must choose between restoration and storage. The liver plays a central role in this nighttime decision. During sleep, it is meant to release stored glucose slowly to keep blood sugar stable while insulin remains low. When late meals or snacks arrive, especially those containing carbohydrates, the liver receives a different message. Instead of releasing energy, it is instructed to store more. Excess glucose is converted into fat, much of which ends up as visceral fat surrounding the organs. Even foods considered healthy during the day can disrupt this process at night simply because the timing no longer matches the body's hormonal state. The pancreas responds immediately to any rise in blood sugar by releasing insulin. At night, this insulin signal is louder and more disruptive. Elevated insulin suppresses growth hormone release and blocks fat breakdown. Fat cells receive the message to hold on tightly to stored energy. This is especially true for visceral fat cells, which are more responsive to insulin and cortisol than subcutaneous fat. Once the signal is sent, the body remains in storage mode for hours, often well into the sleep cycle. Fat cells are not passive storage units. They constantly communicate with the brain, liver, and immune system. At night, they are listening closely for cues of safety or threat. Low insulin and calm cortisol levels tell fat cells that energy can be released without risk. High insulin and elevated stress hormones tell them to protect and store. Late night eating, even in small amounts, can tip this balance towards storage by keeping insulin elevated when it should be falling. What makes this particularly deceptive is that the food itself is not always the problem. A bowl of fruit, a handful of nuts, or a serving of yogurt may be nutritious choices earlier in the day. At night, those same foods can prevent the metabolic switch that allows fat burning to occur during sleep. The body does not judge food by health labels but by hormonal impact. Timing becomes just as important as content. The hours before sleep act as a metabolic switch because they determine the hormonal environment that carries through the night. If insulin falls and cortisol calms, growth hormone rises and fat release becomes possible. If insulin stays elevated and stress remains unresolved, the body chooses storage and protection instead. Most people unknowingly flip the wrong switch by eating late, snacking out of habit, or using food to manage stress. The result is not immediate weight gain, but a gradual accumulation of visceral fat that feels resistant to every effort made during the day. There is a quiet window at night when the body is most responsive to signals of safety and balance. And this is where a thoughtfully chosen nighttime drink can play a supportive role, not as a fat burner, not as a shortcut, but as a biological cue. The goal of such a drink is simple: help insulin come down, calm the stress response, and allow the body's natural nig. Tea time repair systems to function without interference. When insulin remains elevated late in the evening, fat loss is paused. This drink is designed to avoid that problem by containing no sugars and no ingredients that spike blood glucose. Instead, it gently supports insulin lowering by improving liver signaling and stabilizing blood sugar through the night. The liver is especially important here because it acts as the traffic controller for glucose while you sleep. If the liver senses stability, it releases glucose slowly and predictably. If it senses chaos, it triggers cortisol and raises blood sugar defensively. A drink that supports liver function helps prevent that stress response from being activated. Cortisol is another key target. Many people associate cortisol only with emotional stress, but blood sugar instability is one of its strongest triggers. When blood sugar drops too low or spikes too high at night, cortisol rises to compensate. This not only disrupts sleep but also signals visceral fat to remain protected. A properly designed nighttime drink helps smooth these fluctuations, telling the nervous system that there is no emergency to manage. As cortisol calms, the body shifts toward parasympathetic dominance, the state in which digestion, repair, and fat release are allowed to occur. This parasympathetic activation is subtle but powerful. Heart rate slows, breathing deepens, muscles relax, the brain reduces its alertness. These signals travel throughout the body, including to fat cells. Visceral fat, which is highly sensitive to stress hormones, responds by becoming less defensive. It no longer receives the message that energy must be hoarded. This is not forced fat loss but permissive fat loss, where the conditions finally allow stored energy to be accessed. Growth hormone depends on this environment. It is released in pulses during deep sleep A. ND plays a major role in fat metabolism, tissue repair, and muscle preservation. Elevated insulin and cortisol suppress its release. When those hormones are gently lowered, growth hormone can do what it is designed to do. This is why the drink itself does not burn fat directly. Instead, it removes the hormonal blocks that prevent fat from being burned naturally during sleep. It is important to understand that this is not about adding something exotic or extreme. The effectiveness comes from simplicity and timing. The drink works because it aligns with the body's nighttime biology rather than fighting it. It supports the liver instead of overwhelming it. It calms the nervous system instead of stimulating it. It reinforces the message that the day is over and repair can begin. When used consistently, this kind of nighttime ritual becomes a signal the body recognizes. Over time, insulin patterns improve, cortisol rhythms normalize, and visceral fat becomes less resistant. The change is not dramatic in the moment, but meaningful in its effect, because the body is no longer being asked to burn fat while simultaneously being told to stay on guard. Visceral fat behaves differently from other fat because of where it lives and how closely it listens to hormonal signals. It sits deep in the abdomen, surrounding organs that are constantly communicating with the liver and pancreas. Because of this proximity, visceral fat is exposed to higher concentrations of insulin, cortisol, and inflammatory signals than subcutaneous fat. This makes it more dangerous, but it also makes it more responsive. When insulin drops and the body senses safety, visceral fat is often the first to change. This fat is metabolically active, meaning it is constantly exchanging signals with the rest of the body. It breaks down and releases fatty acids more readily when hormonal conditions allow it. Subcutaneous fat, by contrast, is more inert and slower to respond. When insulin remains high, visceral fat expands quickly. When insulin falls and cortisol calms, visceral fat releases energy just as quickly. This is why early improvements in metabolic health often show up as a reduction in waist circumference before changes in overall body weight. The feeling of safety is not emotional in the psychological sense, but biological. Low insulin tells the body that energy is available without needing to be stored. Stable blood sugar tells the brain there is no emergency. Reduced cortisol tells fat cells they do not need to protect vital organs. Together, these signals create an environment where visceral fat no longer serves a survival purpose. Once that purpose disappears, the body has no reason to keep it. Sleep plays a central role in reinforcing this state. Deep, uninterrupted sleep amplifies growth hormone release, which accelerates fat mobilization and tissue repair. As visceral fat begins to shrink, inflammation decreases because this fat is a major source of inflammatory chemicals. Reduced inflammation further improves insulin sensitivity, creating a positive feedback loop. The body becomes better at managing glucose, and morning blood sugar levels begin to stabilize. Many people notice that when this process begins, they wake up feeling different. Hunger is less urgent. Energy is more steady. Cravings are quieter. These are signs that metabolic signaling is improving. The liver is no longer dumping glucose into the bloodstream overnight. The pancreas is not being forced to overproduce insulin. Fat cells are cooperating rather than resisting. This is why the focus should never be on rapid weight loss. Fast drops on the scale often come from water loss, muscle breakdown, or stress-induced calorie deficits. Visceral fat reduction, on the other hand, reflects healing. T means the body trusts its environment again. It means hormonal rhythms are being restored. Belly fat decreases not because it is being attacked, but because it is no longer needed. When metabolic healing becomes the priority, changes feel more sustainable and less fragile. Sleep improves, inflammation softens, and blood sugar control becomes easier. Visceral fat responds to these changes as a natural consequence, not a forced outcome. The goal is not to make the body smaller at any cost, but to make it function better, allowing excess belly fat to resolve as balance returns melting. Visceral fat is not a battle that requires punishment, restriction, or constant vigilance. The body does not respond best to fear or force. It responds to signals. Those signals are calm, consistent, and aligned with biology. Change happens quietly and steadily. This understanding alone can lift a great deal of pressure from people who have been blaming themselves for results that never seemed to match their effort. A simple nighttime habit works not because it overwhelms the system, but because it reassures it. It tells the body that the day is complete, that nourishment has been adequate, and that there is no emergency to prepare for. In that state, survival mode loosens its grip. The nervous system shifts away from alertness and into repair. Hormones begin to move in the direction they were designed to move during rest. Visceral fat, which exists largely as a protective response, no longer receives the message that it must stay. This is why extremes rarely lead to lasting change. Severe calorie restriction, aggressive fasting without support, or intense late-night workouts often send the opposite signal. They tell the body that resources are scarce and stress is high. In response, the body holds on tighter, especially around the organs it considers most vital. What looks like resistance is often intelligence, a system doing its best to keep you alive based on the information it is given. Consistency matters more than perfection because the body learns through repetition. One calm night does not undo years of mixed signals, just as one late snack does not erase progress. What matters is the overall pattern. When the body repeatedly experiences evenings that end in stability rather than stimulation, it begins to trust that pattern. Hormonal rhythms adjust, sleep deepens, blood sugar becomes more predictable. Over time, visceral fat responds because the environment that created it is no longer present. Patience is part of this process because healing follows biological timelines, not emotional ones. The body prioritizes safety first, then repair, and only then visible change. This order cannot be rushed without consequences. When people allow this sequence to unfold naturally, the results tend to last. Belly fat decreases not in dramatic drops, but in steady, reassuring shifts that reflect real metabolic improvement. Trusting the body's intelligence changes the entire experience. Instead of fighting biology, you begin working with it. Instead of fearing food or obsessing over numbers, you focus on signals and rhythms. Small, aligned nighttime habits become powerful, not because they are impressive, but because they are repeatable. Over time, these gentle signals accumulate, and the body responds in ways that once felt impossible.